Hello, Lalit, and welcome to the Lumière Wise Wednesday. And thank you so much for coming on this show.
It's always a pleasure, and thank you for the invite. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
So, to the people watching, this is the book When Change Happens. That's been written by Lalit Jagtiani, who is a very senior leader at SAP. And one of the perks of visiting Singapore whenever I go is an opportunity to meet Lalit and Kunal either at their home or outside for a chat, which is always so stimulating. Some new things that Lalit is thinking about because he's an ideas man. And importantly, we are never far away from discussing the book that continues to inspire me. It's now 4 years, Lalit. I saw one Facebook memory that says it's 4 years now since the book. You know,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I'm thinking that it is something that I keep going back to. So in the midst of the change project, this book comes out again, and then it gets handed around to the team, and we say, "Padho."
That's great. And it's great that you're finding the practical application of the book, and really that was the purpose for which the book was written. It wasn't intended to be a book on which you write a PhD thesis. So I'm glad that you're finding it useful and applicable in your.
It is the quintessential practitioner's handbook, whether it is you're a student of change and transformation the way I am, a practitioner, or a client, the client company. So Lalit, for our audience, tell them a little bit about what it means to be a business transformation specialist at SAP, a role that you've held across geographies, and now, of course, it's another job that you do. But tell our audience a little bit about your work and why change is such an important part of your everyday work.
Yeah, so let me kind of start with the business transformation journey. So, for me personally, transformation didn't come as a career path that I had chosen. It came as a part of a role I was invited to play in an organization. And to be honest, while it sounded really exciting, I wasn't prepared for the challenges that a role like this plays out. Because typically, we assume transformation is a series of structured steps. At least that's what the consultants tell us. And they say, you do step one, then you've achieved so much percentage of transformation. You do step two, you've achieved so much percentage. And really, ultimately, transformation is not about steps, processes, and activities. It's about human dynamics. It's
Hmm.
about people, how you engage with them, how they in turn engage back with you and the organization. And in that engagement, collectively arrive at what we are calling meaning making. So, meaning making means meaning making for the organization. What does the transformation mean, and what's the organization trying to achieve? And meaning making for the individual who's part of that transformation as to what does that mean for me, my role, my career goals, the aspirations that I hold for myself.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
so
really the sense of it.
yeah, no, and what you say is so important because sometimes we miss that in the processes, in the technology, in all of the big jargon that probably gets banded around and makes people very frightened about what this means to their work and their meaning, I guess, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So very often, as organizations, we tend to be instruction driven. That means we tend to instruct, give direction, provide metrics to measure, under the assumption that everyone, once we've created the right guardrails, the train goes in that regular direction. But we forget that, in addition to the metrics and the direction, there is a human at the end, like you correctly said, who's uncertain, unsure of himself, herself,
Yeah,
in the new navigation of things.
correct. And you did this, the writing of the book, while holding a day job. Uh, you did it with a very busy role where you were globe trotting. How did you keep to this practice of writing and sort of doing those 18 chapters? So for me, even 18 is very beautiful. And I want to know what was your thought behind the 18? Was there a thought? Because I've made some meaning. My mind, the meaning making machine, has made some meaning out of the 18.
So So let me first start with how I managed to write the book. Yeah, as you know, I was in a kind of an in an and currently am in an Asia Pac role. So typically customers were across the geographies. Though I'm based in Singapore, we had customers in Australia, Japan, China in those days, and of course India and other parts of Asia. Now, some of these flights are long flights. If you
Yeah.
imagine an Australia flight is 7 hours, you imagine sitting at the airport lounge and then having to check yourself in. It meant actually 9 to 10 hours of a time where actually there's very little you could do. The reason I say that is because, as a matter of practice, I don't address company emails at that point because it's public space and you're not sure of who's sitting next to you and how much confidential data is being shared there. The second thing is I never work on customer topics as well because, again, you have to protect your customers' privacy and data. So then comes the question, how do I fill those 9 hours with something that's a non-threatening, but at the same time is occupying me intellectually, physically, and mentally? And it's one of those flights. I was just sitting there and saying, and just reflecting on some of the journeys that I had, and I realized, hey, there are a whole lot of things that I can probably talk about, primarily because a lot of my experiences are very different from what I read in the books. So I said, how about I just write a story of my experiences? And
Uh,
that's how the birth of this whole book, and that's how I found time to put that book together. And that's how this book happened.
so how were you doing it? I mean, were you typing? Were you writing longhand? I'm just curious.
No, I was typing on my laptop. I've long since lost the fine art of writing on paper too long, but I love writing on my laptop. So it's something that I've been doing and working on, and it helps to create drafts, and then I could send the drafts out very quickly to
Yeah,
Minal, and then Minal would give my first critic and first feedback. So
amazing. Also, Lalit, the 18 chapters.
yes, so actually, to be honest, the book setup was 17 chapters. So the original book had only 17 chapters, and then as author, I kind of got myself an editor who I thought would probably add the right perspective, and we had this editor who told me, look, if you want me to correct your English, then you're come to the wrong person. If you want me to look at your work and make it into something that in my view makes sense to the readers, then absolutely that's something that I can sign up for. And then came our first feedback, and she said, I had a look at what you've written, and frankly I'm pretty clueless as to what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve in this. It's a series of narratives, it's a series of sequences, but how does it all fall together? So the 18th chapter, if you see, is about how it all falls together, the whole engagement model. I had my argument with the editor, but she said, look, I'm your first reader. If I'm confused and I'm an interested reader, I'm spending so many hours on the book. Nobody else has that time. So I think that's how 18th chapter came about, and that's how it became 18 chapters.
So it's very interesting. So apparently, uh, in the Bhagavad Gita, everything that the Lord had to tell Krishna, he finished talking in the second chapter. But because Krishna had a student who was very curious, who had a lot of questions, uh, it became 18 chapters. And 18 chapter actually is, the Bhagavad Gita and the 18th chapter. And it continues to be something that is everyday handbook. And you will always find something in it for everyone. So I know this sounds lofty, but I was very thrilled with the parallel to me of saying, you give a lot of clues in the beginning and then you wrap it up all nicely for us in the 18th chapter, Lalit. So kudos to that and to your editor.
Yes, absolutely.
Coming to storytelling, Lalit, you're fascinated with stories and you are a master raconteur. You tell wonderful stories and, of course, you write wonderful stories. So tell us about this thing of film and how that shaped your perspective on narrative and storytelling.
So it's very interesting. I was doing a day job in an oil company, and one of the stints I had in that company because I was part of what they call a potential future leader program. So they had idea was to expose me in different units of the oil company, and one of them was when I was working with the brand team. And just for a lark, I actually went and did an internship in an ad agency. And when I was doing that internship, they said, "Hey, there's this copywriters exam that many of the copywriters are giving." And they said, "Would you like to attempt it?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" I was sitting in anyway part of the internship, so I did the copywriters exam, and it came out that I scored pretty well, which was very surprising to me. And I realized, and the ad agency, in fact, had called me aside and said, "Why are you doing what you're doing in your oil and gas company? Why didn't you get yourself onto this creative side of things?" And that kind of made me reflect. Maybe there's a part of me that I'm not really exploring. So, what I then did is, I actually, in those days, as a part of the brand exercise, we would had also created a communication, internal communication.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, in those days, there was this video newsletter called, I think it was News Track by India Today or some other company. And I said, can we not create something like an oil track, which was for the oil company? And that's how I started, going across, talking to people and making them send nuggets of film and then assembling it together into a story of what's happening in different parts of the organization. And then I realized it's something which was interesting. And then I went and did a diploma in filmmaking, and that resulted in me getting a little more fine tuned in that art, where I learned screenwriting, storytelling, cinematography. I think that's where this whole excitement of film went. Then I spoke to my company and I said, "Look, you're making all these ads and you're making all these corporate videos. Why don't we make them directly? I directly engage the professionals like the cameraman and the technical crew, and we will save a lot more money. But at the same time, you will also land up getting good quality film." And that's how I landed up actually making, while I was even working, making films on the job. And the funny thing was, for me, was that many of them, which were like ad films, they got very high TRPs in those days.
Oh,
That's when I realized that people were actually liking what I was putting together. So that's how the whole love for film and narrative on film versus job kind of balanced out.
yeah, amazing. There are so many lives that Lalit Jagtiani lives in one lifetime. So there is the filmmaker, there's the writer, there's the storyteller, there's the SAP consultant, and many hats as dad and husband and many other roles that you play so deftly. So tell us a little bit about your time management. I mean, how does one do this all together? And doing this book, how long did it take you to produce the book and to put it out?
So firstly, time, at least for me, I've realized that you never get tired when you like doing what you're doing. So during this film and oil phase that I was in, I used to start my edit at 9:30 in the night, and used to go on till about 4 in the morning and report into work at 9 sharp. And every day I did that for a couple of years, and not a day it was that, "Hey, I'm sleepy and I'm tired." And the video shoots we used to do was on the weekends, but it never felt like that at all. So I
Okay.
realized that anything that gives you energy doesn't make you tired. And things that you like doing and love doing actually give you much more energy and much more effort to put together. So that to me is the is how, at least for me, time has been. It's always been about what I like doing, and then setting aside time to do that, using it more like a battery charger to then take care of things that I need to do rather than what I want to do.
Yeah, well, I think that really is so important, and being able to then balance. So this process of editing, this back and forth that went. Were there times when you were frustrated and said, like maybe I should just take a pause, or did you experience like a writer's block, or that people talk about at any time when you just put aside the writing project? Did that happen?
Yes, so that comes to the process of writing the book itself, right? So the book itself, you're right. More than for me, the writer's block came as to the storytelling, as to how much do you start preaching versus how much do you start making it engaging for the reader. And
Hmm.
that's always the struggle or balance that I always had to think about. So there were times when I realized I was just writing like I was writing an instruction manual. And there
Uh,
are times when I was writing it like a story. So, that mix sometimes used to get me stuck. It used to be, and my ground rule was very simple. If I'm writing too much theory, then I would stop. And I would try and figure out what would make it connect to the audience that I have, what would make it more meaningful for them. And that sometimes took a bit of a while. And that's the blocks I used to have, if I may put them as blocks. The other, is a lot of my work was when I was traveling. So sometimes when travel was less, then obviously the pace came down slightly.
uh,
The whole process, it took itself took me about a year to put together in terms of the book, as the first draft. The iterations took another 6 months, and then we were out.
Also, Lalit, what I like so much about the book is at every time the key paragraph is out here in bold, in red. So even because I had read the book and then I'd reread the book and parts of it, even when I was going back to it to prepare for today's interview, I was happy skimming through it and then making sure that I had all the key points covered, which you've done, making it so handy. That's one. So, just the thoughtful design of the book, the layout, and the way you've used visuals in your storytelling. Maybe you want to tell a little bit about the whole experiential part of doing this book.
Yeah. So then about the visual part, which is an interesting story in itself. So I was looking as to how could we best illustrate a book like this, and I came across an Indonesian writer who used to put cartoons for newspapers. Something like the R.K. Lakshman of Times of India. Very similar. This is the version for the Indonesian newspapers, and I was very interested in the way he summarized the news page for the reader. In that one or two pictorial elements, you actually could get a gist of what the news in that particular, or what was key news in that particular day was all about. And I liked that approach. And then I went and got in touch with him, and he said, "See, I've never done a management book. I don't know what your writing is all about. I speak Bahasa fluent, which is what his native language is. I'm not great at English, so I may not even be able to comprehend what you put together." So that was the interesting paradigm where I really needed his insight to create the picture, and he needed my explanation to get the insight. And finding that balance took a bit of lot of coffee. Starbucks made a lot of money in that process, but that coffee telling sessions to me were most interesting. Actually, it's like a narrative and he's challenging me in terms of why is this an insight, what's so great in what you're saying. And then having that conversation, that also sometimes made me reflect what I have written, is that really what I want to write. So I sometimes went back and rewrote parts of it as well. It was like more like an iterative learning for both of us, him challenging the insight and me challenging. So I mean, I enjoyed the process. I hope the readers enjoy the visuals, but I definitely love that process.
And it's very different. And like you said, I did know this part that he did know a lot of English. So every time, I guess you would have to have the sittings for him to understand the content.
Yes,
That's rich.
yes.
So Lalit, in this book, your protagonist hero Matt has, you know, he's the person who sort of the sutradhar for the book, right? And he makes a lot of discoveries. So is Matt Lalit?
Well, yes and no. In the sense, many of the experiences that Matt has had, we are talking of now the work experiences, not the romantic experiences, are actually what I have been through myself, or a very dear co-coach has been through. So, because the idea was to make the insights real or the scenarios real. Of course, the whole company, there was no such sequence of events that happened in one organization. There's assimilation of many experiences in many organizations built into that one piece of narrative. But the interesting thing is the names. If you see here, the names I've used, many of them are Hollywood names, right? And the reason I did that was because a lot of my clients, I may unknowingly uh, reveal some of their personality traits. So I deliberately wanted to keep it as remote from reality as possible from the character. I'm sure the individuals who have actually been through that would recognize themselves. But as an individual, if you were to read the book and you were to meet the person who was probably whom I was reflecting in my book, you'd never be able to make the connection. Because I've kept the name so far apart from reality that's very difficult to correlate the two, and that is deliberate actually.
Amazing. And when you talk about how the change agents come together and how they navigate the process of change, the whole politics, the alignment, the effort it takes. So there's a element of drama. It's a business book, but you're in the story. You're sort of going the ins and outs of it, and at every place there is a nugget to learn from on like you said, the whole managing the relationships, getting people to feel comfortable being taking stock of there's a framework that you use about people who are going to be the supporters, people who are going to be blockers for the change. So tell us a little bit about the uh, how you sort of brought in this part of uh, bringing in all of the enablers and the barriers. So maybe you can just a tiny masterclass on that, just very quickly.
Sure. So, one of the things that when I kind of learned the concepts of change, we were taught very early to do what we call a stakeholder analysis. So, enablers and blockers and topics like that. The challenge is, we were asked to do that in the context of a sitting. Now, if you think of it logically, you are meeting a bunch of people, and suddenly in your mind, based on some perceived notion that you have of engaging with that individual, identifying a potential person as a blocker or an enabler and a supporter. And what I was wanting to bring about is, while these concepts are real, the way you actually put it together is based on an actual experience. So I always say, don't go by what people say, go by what they do, and don't take an initial stand. Because if you take a stand, for example, that this person is a blocker, we have a very interesting concept called the mental model, where our mind perceives people in a particular way, and then we treat people in that same particular way, actually causing them to behave in that way that we intended, and telling us, oh, okay, see how great an insight I have. I actually have made this individual, or predicted correctly the way this individual is behaving. But actually it's a natural outcome of the process we typically engage in. So to give a very simple example, if I kind of ask somebody, are you angry with me? The person says no. I say, but I think you're angry with me. He says, but no, I'm not angry with you. I think, yesterday when we were talking, you sounded angry to me. If you keep doing that again and again, the fourth time or fifth time, the person will actually get angry, and then you say, see, I knew you were angry with me. So it's our reinforcing behavior that forces people to behave in that way. Similarly, when you say, I think you're a crook, and then you force the person to become defensive, and you say, see, you're defensive, that means you have something to hide. We play this game. It's a standard game. And the idea and narrative of this book is to go with the natural flow of people, understand people, accept them for what they are, and understand that people don't get up every morning trying to resist change. Nobody comes in the morning and says, let me resist change when I go to work. There's a reason why they do it. Understanding that reason is very critical, and then how do we work within that reason and make this person understand the consequence, and the benefits of it. I think that's really the challenge of a good transformation person. And that's why, you find very few transformations actually succeed, because the people who are actually running those transformations don't understand the basic dynamic of humans, and the fact that, it's not about structure, process, and project, it's about human dynamics.
Yeah. And a lot of times it happens that the even the adequacy of the team, so you have a vision, you have sponsors, but then the creation of this whole team that would be the change agents to a make the change and b to make the change stick, both these things may not happen. So a lot of good work that is intended may never meet the outcomes. Have you experienced this also, Lalit?
Very often. So my first advice to all our customers is, don't select change agents by roles. Sometimes we have, oh, this person an HR person, he's a people person, let's put him in change. Oh, he's a supply chain person, so we need a change agent in supply chain, so let me put him as a supply chain person in change. and you're almost doing not only the organization a disservice, but the individual himself or herself. A change agent is a characteristic trait, and organizations need to spend that 10 extra minutes in identifying that right person and spending that 10 extra minutes in effort, because they will land up saving a lot of money and achieve a lot of good outcomes if they get the right person. And that's where I think most organizations tend to do things in a hurry. They tend to do things in an organized way and say, okay, these are the 6 people, these are the people in this project, pull them out and make them change it. And you almost always, no matter how much knowledge, insight, and wisdom you share with them, it's almost sure that this is not going to work and it's going to fail.
As someone who understands communication so intimately, I want to understand the communication of change, the buy-in that you get from people, and the the media and the methods that you use to get the change messaging across. Is there, what is your recommendation for this? From the communication of the vision for change to the actual nuts and bolts of the what are we changing, how is it going to impact your life, that piece.
Yeah. So, couple of things when we talk of communication and messaging, right? We know different communication methods, right? The standard face-to-face communication is probably the most expensive and the most intense. So the first thing from a pure discovery perspective is to identify where is the highest impact in people. And those are the ones you want to really engage face to face. The rest, there are other tiered ways of making it happen. And there's a model that says that the higher the degree of change that you want comes through face-to-face interaction, because people want to see each other in the eye. But at the same time, that's a very expensive and that's a very time-intensive activity. So first thing is to distribute that. That's number one. Number two, when you're talking about communicating the change, and we need to accept the reality that no matter how much analysis you've done, change or the messaging of change is always going to be at a higher level. It's going to be about vision, the bigger purpose of an organization. At a more micro level, what's the unit trying to achieve? At an even more micro level, what's the team trying to achieve? So it's all very spirited in that space. Nobody has actually micro worked out for each individual what is it that they will need to do differently. And that's really where the real part of change becomes engaging. You
Mhm.
provide the team with the outcome, but then let them identify for themselves in their role what is it that they see they need to do differently to achieve that impact. Because ultimately, people know what they do. No matter what processes you've documented, everybody does things in a different way than the documented process that you have.
Yes.
That self discovery, that self evaluation, and at the same time giving them the view of, what are you trying to achieve for yourself first. What people without their own personal goals will always have a challenge with any change that happens, because you really don't know why you want to do things differently. You want to get up in the morning and do the same thing that you were doing yesterday, and you try to struggle to figure out why that needs to be different. But if you have a purpose, so for example, to say that, if I as a professional want to be a great person or an expert in supply chain, then I need to know what are the different scenarios as an executive I need to respond to in terms of that particular supply chain initiative. If that's my vision, then no matter what challenges you throw at me, I will figure a way to make it work, because I want to become a great and successful supply chain expert. And that's what we keep telling people. Expertise is not something by doing the same thing every day again and again. You don't become an expert. You become a robot and you'll be replaced sooner or later by people. Your ability to and address gray areas, your ability to address challenges, your ability to see the unseen and come up with solutions for that is where your expertise lies. And this is where your self-actualization lies. This is where your career growth as a professional lies. Once you have these kind of conversations, people understand that this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. This is why I, as a human being, exist today and not a machine. And that's why I've not been replaced. I think that's the thing that we keep reinforcing in people to make that change happen.
Amazing. No, I think this is really important and powerful. Lalit, whom did you intend the book for when you were first writing it?
So it was intended for practitioners, because when I came in as a practitioner, I realized that so much theory existed. I went with all the theory. I did got trained by a whole lot of consultants. But when I actually went on the ground, I realized nothing prepares you for the reality.
Hmm.
And the reality is not about applying theories. Yes, theories give you direction, they give you clarity, they give you an insight that you can potentially apply in a situation, but it never prepares you for the real thing. So I realized that practitioners such as myself needed some of these practical insights that they could go back to and reflect on, and then correlate their theoretical knowledge and mix the two together and create a powerful cocktail that would make them successful. And that's one of the reasons why initially that was the group I had targeted for.
Then what happened? Where did the interest in the book come from, and where does it come from now?
So the interest in book came from the professionals as a first step, but a lot of practitioners actually, a lot of coaches reached out to me and said, "Hey, can we understand how we can convert whatever you're putting together into a method, into something
Hmm.
we can actually deliver at our customers?" And that was something that kind of then evolved into a deeper conversation around how can we create approaches that replicate what the book has said beyond that. So that's where the whole discussion around a workbook came about. And then there were people who kind of read it for themselves. It was very interesting. I got some mails from people to say, actually, what you have said has made a difference to my life. And there was a mother who came and said, what you've written has made a difference to the way I've been able to get my children to motivate it. So it's interesting, how different people have found applications even in their own personal and family lives. And to me, that's really where the value comes from. If they are able to use it in some way that makes a difference in somebody that's important to you in your life,
Yeah.
that's where I see value in the work that I've done.
Yeah, so it's almost like something which is more universal in what you touch,
Yes,
and it could be a change in a life stage. It could be trying to influence change with a family member. So there are many, many applications. If
yes.
you hadn't, you know, post COVID, if you were writing this book, Lalit, would this book have been different in any way?
Um, the human dynamics part would probably not be different, but the way we engage with people. Because if you see, a large part of my book is physical engagement. That is actually engaging with people without a situation like how you and I are currently engaging in a digital format.
Yeah.
Um, I wasn't too sold on that format, but I realized that in COVID times, people were able to connect over digital mediums. And to me, that's the learning that I would probably add to say maybe this is how you could also engage.
So, that brings us almost to the close of our session. And I really, if you want to leave some thoughts with the audience on why they need to pick when change happens, Lalit, why would you ask them to pick the book?
I would simply say there are insights in it that they can apply to their personal lives, they can apply to their professional lives, they can apply to organizations that they're working in. It's got practical insights, and my only invitation to the people there out there is don't read the book, apply the book. That's where the real value is. Reading any book is good enough. It's the application of what it does to your life that's going to be something that's will give meaning to this book.
There are so many uh, parts in this book that I have you know marked. It's well thumbed, it's underlined, and that should also give you, the viewer, a confidence that this is a well thumbed book, not just by me, by several people in my team as well. Lalit Jagtiani, thank you once again for coming to this episode of the Lumiere Wise Wednesday, and we look forward to you doing another book, and I hope that happens sometime soon.
Yes, so more than the other book, this may be made into a television series or a OTT platform series. That's what I'm currently working on. So you may see a dramatic version of this book as well in the future, if all goes well.
Amazing. Always up to learning something from you, Lalit. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed this, and hopefully your viewers enjoy it as well.
Yes, and we are going to wait for the Netflix documentary or the more cinematic theatrical version of the book.
Super.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.